A king in exile, his kingdom taken over by the British, hand in gloves with his arch rival, his subjects excessively taxed. Who is going to be the savior? If this sounds like a prompt to write a blockbuster screenplay, then you're right. This is an excellent plot. In fact, this is something which has actually taken place in the history of India's freedom struggle. For those of you familiar with South India and its contribution to our nation's freedom movement, you would have recognized this as the outline of Kerala Verma Pazhassi Raja's fight against the British, spearheaded by the Kurichiyans. And for those of you who are wondering what are all these names about, who are these people and what did they actually do? Here is the first installment of the October edition of the Great Tribal Warriors of Bharat monthly series dedicated to a famous Kurichiyan, Thalakkal Chanthu. Let's take a flight way down south to Wayanad, a district in Kerala. Today, Wayanad is a very popular tourist destination because of the natural beauty and tranquility that it offers. But 200 years ago, the situation was very different. Originally a forest country, Wayanad was ruled by the Hunter kings or the Veda kings. Then, sometime between the 1600s and the 1700s, they got into fights with the neighboring regions, and the kings of Kottayam and Kurumbanadu were constantly at war with Wayanad. The kings won, and initially Wayanad was partitioned between Kottayam and Kurumbanadu. Eventually, though, the entire region came under the rule of the Kottayam king, and Mananthavadi became the capital of the region. Now, to assist him in this war, the Kottayam king had brought along with him a set of hill people. The origin of this hill people is a little ambiguous. There is both a mythological angle to it as well as a socio-cultural twist to it. As for mythology, they were born out of a bird that in itself was born out of a red lotus. So it's called the Chintamara Pakshi. And so it's believed that the hill people descended or were blessed by supernatural powers through this bird, and that's how they came to be living in this area. The socio-cultural bit says that they are distantly related to the Nayars of the Travancore region. Well, whatever their origin be, what mattered most to the Kottayam king was that once these people took aim with their bow and arrow, they never missed a target. The term to describe this ability in the local language is Kurichiyans, meaning the one who took aim. And so from this term, the label for this hills people came into existence. And so they came to be known as the Kurichiyans. After the war got over, the Kurichiyans decided to stay back as a sign of loyalty and affection for the Kottayam king. Some of them started practicing agriculture, whereas the others joined as archers in the king's army. One of them was Thalakkal Chanthu. Thalakkal Chanthu was born into the Karkodil family, which lived in the Kunyomi village, which today falls in the Todarnad Panchayat, which is 24 kilometers away from Mananthavadi. Like everyone else, he also took a great liking to archery and grew up to be an adept archer. Because of this, he sought employment with the king's army. Not surprising then that he quickly worked his way up and came to the notice of the commander, Edichana Kunkan. Kunkan was not just impressed by his archery skills, he also noticed that this chap had great mind skills. So under his guidance, Chanthu evolved as a warrior. He was able to design strategic military attack plans under impossible situations, something obviously quite advantageous for an army chief. Kunkan started looking upon Chanthu as his right-hand man. Kerala Verma, the Kottayam king, already had great admiration for the Kurichiyans. He used to openly declare that so long as the Kurichiyans were with him, he needed nobody else to win a war. The simple-minded, honest, hard-working Kurichiyans also reciprocated the king's sentiments. Then in 1792, with the fall of Tipu Sultan, through the Treaty of Seringapatam, Malabar was ceded to the East India Company, and much to everyone's surprise, Wayanad was annexed. This came as a big surprise to everyone because the king of Wayanad had in the past been a great friend and a source of support to the East India Company. In fact, he had extended military support during the siege of Tellicherry, and the siege was broken primarily because of his support. Now with this annexation, things certainly look different. Well, the company was not something that honored friendship with its Indian counterparts. It soon set about to business, signing treaties which required kings to pay a protection tribute in the form of natural produce alone. Matters took a turn for worse when Veeravarma, the king of Kurumranadu, was appointed as the tax collector for Wayanad. Veeravarma already had an eye on the Kottayam king's palace. He wanted to usurp that seat. And now this gave him the perfect opportunity to do that. He set about pleasing the East India Company officials to the hilt. And side by side, he also unleashed his own tax campaign, taxing the people 4 times the normal permitted limit. Unable to pay the taxes, there was a mass exodus of farmers, and those who stayed behind started to sell their properties in order to be able to pay the taxes. Veeravarma was also sending daily intelligence reports to the company administration. This greatly helped them in keeping a track on the whereabouts of the Pazhassi Raja, who had unleashed a campaign of encouraging his subjects to not pay taxes and to slow down production so that there would be nothing to pay taxes in the form of. Sadly for Pazhassi Raja, Veeravarma succeeded in pushing him out of his kingdom. Deprived of his palace, treasury and troops, he had to go into retirement in the forest. Of course, he was accompanied by a lot of the Kurichiyans, some of who did decide to stay back, but a majority of them, including of course Thalakkal Chanthu from the army, joined him in exile. And now even though they were all in exile, they still kept track of what was happening in their kingdom. And so it didn't miss their point that Veeravarma was overtaxing. In fact, he was taxing 4 times the normal permissible amount on the people. And this was, of course, quite painful. Once when Chanthu was out on a spying mission, he encountered an incident. Here, a peon from the East India Company showed up at the house of a Kurichiyan and demanded the paddy tax. Chanthu was startled. He reported this matter to Kunkan, the commander of the army. Kunkan decided to take matters in his own hands. When the peon next showed up to collect the tax, he killed him on the spot. Now, this should have been an eye-opener for the company administration, and they should have re-looked at their policies. But they didn't. And in doing so, they opened the way for their own misfortunes. This incident gave impetus to Kunkan and Chanthu to plan a large-scale retaliation, which ultimately bore fruit on the morning of 11th October 1802. On that day, they decided to attack the garrison of the 1st Battalion of the 4th Bombay Native Infantry that was stationed at the Palmyra Fort, locally known as the Panamaram kottah. On the morning of 11th October 1802, 400 to 500 Kurichiyans, led by Thalakkal Chanthu, arrived at the garrison armed with bows and arrows. They intended to carry out a 3-pronged attack. One side would attack the barracks, the second would attack the homes of the officers, and the third would attack the sepoys. They also gathered up all the ammunition and blew them up. The court of the magistrate and the cantonment was burnt down. Everyone except for the servant of Captain J.P. Dickinson, under whom the detachment was serving, was killed. It was, in short, a massacre. When news of this incident reached the governor of Mysore, who was also in charge of the military control of Malabar, he was infuriated. This person was none other than Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington. He already had no likeness for Wayanad or its people. He considered the place below his dignity, and he thought of the people as being savage and cruel. Also, the geography of Wayanad was not at all to his military liking. Because of his hilly terrain, it was very difficult for the British military to carry out its operation, but it was highly suited for mobile and agile guerrilla warfare, at which Chanthu and the Kurichiyans were adept. What infuriated him even more was that just few miles from Panamaram kottah was the headquarters of the battalion, where the in-charge Major Drummond just sat there totally shaken to the core by the nature of this incident. So reinforcements had to be sent from Mysore and Madras, and by the time they arrived, the troops arrived, Thalakkal Chanthu and his band of archers had unleashed complete destruction of the place, whatever else remained. This was a major victory for Kerala Verma and the Kurichiyans, and a great shock to the East India Company, which had come to believe that the king, now that he was in exile, was not going to cause them any trouble at all. They now had to rethink their strategy on how to control and maintain their hold over Malabar. So, what would be the plan of the East India Company? Would they use military tactics, or would they resort to using age-old tactics of betrayal to nab Chanthu and eliminate the king? Well, that's for a future episode. I hope you found this first installment of the October edition quite insightful, and I'll see you soon again. Till then, take care.